Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of A Little Atypical. My name is Leja, you can call me Lay. This is just the start of a 3-part series to close out 2024. The goal of these 3 parts is to reflect, inspire, and set the tone for the year to come. So part 1 and part 2 will come out the same week, while part 3 will come out on the 30th of December. So as you could tell from the title, this episode is all about lessons to carry into the new year, completely inspired by a list of lessons I learned when it was my birthday, and I kind of just added to that list. So I'm just going to share all the lessons I learned this year. Lesson number 1, there is a difference between what makes a person feel secure versus what will make them feel successful. This is something I realized because of how automatic and uninspired my life has become. From my view, I realized that the things that make me feel secure are the matters of the mind, like things that has a lot more logic to it, but things that create feelings of success are matters of the soul. So I talked about this, like how I felt graduating, how I struggled to feel accomplished for that, because I realized the pursuit of going to get a college degree was a goal of security, not in the sense of like I thought it would guarantee me a role in my profession, but it felt like a defined next step. And you'll learn why having like a defined next step was so important for me back then. It's important for me to have this distinction because sometimes I would get in my head because I did this thing that everyone is congratulating me for, and yet I felt more relieved that it was done, but no sense of other emotions. And I didn't feel like I wanted to remember that moment, as sad as that sounds, because it was a goal of security. Another example is when a person gets a job and the job they get is for financial security versus a job you feel inclined to grow in. And I think your energies between those two things are such a distinction that you don't go into the actions of those goals with the wrong expectations. Lesson 2 is help is all around you when you're ready to accept it. We live in a society that I would describe as hyper independent is the norm, because it pretty much shames you for needing help. And when I am talking about this, I'm talking about the expectation of you to be out of the house by a certain age and stuff like that. And honestly, things that are not really common in every single culture, because at least knowing like my background, it is more common for multi-generational households to exist and not push people out of the house. But in the culture where I live in, like the actual place, not like my, I guess, ethnic background culture, but like my geographic culture. So it is more common to be very hyper independent and push people out before they're ready to, or expect people to know things more rapidly. The truth of the matter is we don't need help in everything, but there are still things that don't always come natural to us. We all have different educational backgrounds, and whether our schools contributed to that or parents and our upbringing contributed to that, there are some things that just don't come natural to us, okay? And you can still be independent and self-efficient even when looking for help, as long as you stop seeing it from a place of inadequacy and start to see it as a more efficient way of living and to grow. I'm going to combine 3, 4, and 5 because it kind of wraps up in what I have to say. Number 3 is confidence is a lifetime practice, and how we embody it varies from person to person. 4 is trying is all anyone could do. The result of our actions are out of our control, but taking action is in our control. And 5 is looking for proof of the outcome keeps you stuck. This topic is always hard for me because it's hard to have a clear explanation on this, but the example I'm going to use is I had a lot of revelations about confidence, especially this year, such as the method of faking it is less effective than acting as is for me. When I was thinking about these lessons, it came from my own approaches to things. So, one thing I did this year is went on a health journey, and I took a slower approach to things like losing weight than pretending to feel comfortable with myself when I actually felt unwell often. And the reason why I categorize this as hard to discuss is because when it comes to the topic of weight loss, health, and stuff like that, people want to, I guess, lose that element of the conversation because their mindset isn't in a place to handle that conversation, you know? Especially with what's been going on with conversations on whether something is fat phobic or if something, how we look at things, if that's just someone being healthy or like all these conversations about it. So I'm just gonna stick to how I felt about it and my approach to it. I didn't know if it would work out to do that, you know? I'm gonna use my health goal as an example, but what I did is try. And I tried despite not knowing the outcome. It is showing up better than the day before and not worrying about being the best, you know? It is keeping promises to myself. Those things are what confidence is for me. The thing is, I understand that these are the things that helped me, and expecting other people to feel confident through those ways is unrealistic because what will help a person feel confident depends on where they're at, what makes them feel sure and decisive. In my case, I simply felt confident for being willing to acknowledge my dissatisfaction and experiment with ways to solve what I was unhappy with. And that's why I wanted to talk about this, because losing weight is not going to make everyone feel confident. There is a lot that goes into it, and I also think that there is a lack of education with that topic. And I do think it is a sensitive topic, which is why I'm kind of hesitant to talk about my experience with that and why it helped me with my confidence, because it wasn't just the process, like the result of it, of me hitting that goal, but it was more of that I committed to it, made me feel more confident within myself, that I kept showing up for myself. But I also understand that confidence is just this kind of weird thing where how another person feels it is not guaranteed for another person. So I just want that reminder in there so you can take away from the lesson of you need to know what makes you confident. Moving on to lesson number 6. Nothing poisons your potential more than insecurity. In terms of this, there's 2 ways that you can show being insecure. There's passive and then reactive. When you're passively insecure, you are hiding. You are not participating in life. You are physically somewhere, but not mentally there, and express a lot of self-loathing behavior. There is some self-sabotaging and low self-esteem. While I think when you are reactively insecure, there is projection, a competitive mindset, boasting because you see whatever you're boasting about as the highest level you'll accomplish, sabotaging others, and overall just having a closed mind. And I thought a lot about insecurity this year, and this is kind of like moving on to from the conversation of confidence, because I feel like you can't talk about confidence without talking about insecurity and what insecurity does to you as a person. I had a lot of thoughts about this because when thinking about confidence, right, you cannot ignore insecurity and how it can affect you and ruin your potential. So those are just like some observations I made about it. And I realized that when I'm insecure, I possess a passive way of being insecure. So hiding out and not participating in life are the number one ways I behave once I feel insecure. And I think observing that about myself and learning that about myself put a lot into perspective for me. Moving on to number 7 and 8. So 7, self-responsibility is the baseline for improvement. Number 8 is someone's perception of you isn't a definition. It's a reflection of their inner world, so don't take things personally because it never is. 2 things I wanted to talk about, so that's why I combined those lessons. The victim mentality. I know that I never really liked hearing like the word like, oh, you're thinking like a victim. I kind of get it a lot more than I initially did. How it's described is like things are always happening to you, you know? And instead of having that mindset of things are always happening to you, you need to start focusing on the things you have control of. And there was a TikTok trend like the other day, and it was like everyone was like posting like focus on the things you have control of. So one of them being your health. Obviously, health is the fundamental thing. It's not that it's your fault if you're healthy or unhealthy. It's more like how you take action in your health management is very important and is within your control, because health management looks like calling out your behaviors that you know are not the healthiest, and instead of blaming everything else around you, you make do with what you have and what you could do. Like, for example, I was very sedentary, and a lot of people don't want to admit that their activity level, they don't have a high enough activity level to eat the way they do, if I'm being honest. So one thing I did, because one, I can't afford a gym, until I finally just invested in a walking pad. Before that, I had a watch, but obviously your phone can also track your steps. But I now have a watch, and I was just walking and pacing around the house, just getting up and move and working with the things I have and space I have, because doing that little action is still part of managing my health. It's not a big thing, it's something that builds up over time. And that's the thing, like I mentioned before, like having slower actions, making things habitual first, and getting into the habit of doing something, even if it's the smallest thing that you can do at that moment. For example, it's harder for you to eat healthy because you can't buy the organic options. Forget about buying the organic options. Just start with frozen vegetables, start with canned vegetables, and if then your problem is, oh, you don't have time to cook, learn how to habit stack so you can cook and do something else. Like, for example, if it's like you want to just relax after a long day and watch a show, make it a thing to like have a setup for when you're cooking and you can cook and watch your show. Habit stack those things together, and that's still a way to manage your health. All I'm saying is it doesn't have to be like this overly perfect, expensive way to do it. You just have to try your best to incorporate things with what you have. And on top of that, other things that you have control of is your skills, like developing your skills, developing your character, developing your mindset, choosing your hobbies and your knowledge, getting into a habit of learning new things to develop your skills, and just learning in general. You have control of your peace, meaning learning how to not be so reactive to the world around you and choosing what you respond to and how you respond to the things around you. And of course, like your faith and your spirituality, you have control of that. The reason why sometimes we don't do anything is because of other people's perceptions of us. Sometimes it's hard to get into a mindset of ignoring other people's opinions because you just end up taking things so personally. On top of that, learning how to not take things personally, because even though we as humans are sharing the world, we aren't conceptualizing it the same way, which is reflected through thoughts, beliefs, actions, and behavior. And if something is really important to you, figure out actions that will make a difference. Look for solutions and not just talk about how bad something is, you know? And I know it goes back to the conversation of, well, what if I don't have resources? Well, what if I don't do this? Well, what if I. But that is why focusing on what you can do at that moment in time, if it's really something huge stopping you, or if it's just your mindset around it. And I have to think about this because sometimes I really have to clock my own tea. So those were like two really big lessons. And moving on to lesson number 9, which is change isn't always what we could see. People give up when they don't notice progress. But sometimes we get so fixated on the little pieces that we forget about the other ones it is connected to create the picture for everything to like come together. And some pieces may not be able to connect until we figure out the surrounding pieces to formulate it, you know? Until we can formulate it into something we can recognize. Think of life just like a puzzle, like it's pieces. And sometimes the things, when we figure out where a piece goes, is maybe not the piece that we were looking for, but it can connect to the pieces that we were. And eventually everything will come together to see a picture. Don't fixate on the pieces, just focus on the process of arranging things, of making things come together. And that takes time, it takes thought, it takes patience. Lesson number 10 is procrastination and deprioritization of the things you want are the quickest way to self-abandonment. How can one create love without presence in a relationship? And that includes the relationship with yourself. Every time you say that you'll do something, you'll do that thing, then you make everything that would light your soul on fire a lower priority. That not only tells your brain that the things involving your dreams are important, but also that you are a liar and that you can't be trusted. And how can one have a healthy and loving relationship without trust being present? This adds on to lesson 11, which is trust, honesty, compassion, understanding, open communication, and boundaries are the foundation of a healthy relationship, including with yourself. Because I know we always talk about self-love, but we need to talk about trust. We need to talk about honesty. We need to talk about understanding yourself and having like these open dialogues with yourself, whether it's through a journal or like talking to yourself. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but some people conceptualize things by talking, so it's a little better, but I digress on that point. And if you want a healthy relationship, if you want healthy relationships with other people, you also gotta practice those things that make a healthy relationship with yourself. Lesson 12, stop searching for validation outside of yourself. Lesson 13, to come together, things must fall apart. 14, decenter romantic relationships, they aren't the end-all, be-all of love. 15, love is learned. Don't feel guilty over uncharted territory. And 16, throughout the timeline. I'm going to do a bit of a story time with all these lessons. And this is a hard story time for me, but let's just get into it. I didn't necessarily have feelings of wanting to live until maybe after 17. And a huge part of it was that I was miserable because I was constantly seeking validation from things outside of myself. More specifically, from guys. And after a long period, 7 years of my self-esteem being wrecked and being in a very dark place, I had my first boyfriend. I got into the college I always wanted to go into. I had friends. I had the feeling of desiring to live, and from that point, I couldn't remember the last time I felt that. Maybe 8, 9, 10. Those times were hard, but the things that were hard was out of my control, and at least I was happier. But then 2022 happened, and it was like that was the start of everything falling apart. And by end of 2023, I was single, down to maybe 3 close friends, ended a contract role with no other job prospects in sight, and the unhealthiest I've been, newly discovering my PCOS symptoms, having constant energy crashes, migraines, and not being taken seriously because I was at my highest weight of 170 pounds, which, if you're short like me, it is heavy, but still having Ozempic pushed on me, even though I was already working on getting my weight down naturally, was very disheartening. And also, an FYI, by the next time I went to the doctor, I was 21 pounds down, but still experiencing energy crashes and other symptoms. And I'm saying this because even though so much fell apart, it gives me peace of mind that it will all make sense eventually. But I'm saying this even though so much fell apart, it gives me peace of mind that it will all make sense eventually. Physically, this year was demanding, and emotionally, it was a roller coaster because it was like being in a gray state until it all went dark, curtains closed, the end, whatever you want to call it, was so real. Even though with breaking up, it happened end of 2023, I would say like September, but it didn't really feel over until June 2024. And when you are the one that did the breaking up, people always assume it means that you're the one that fell out of love or that you were looking at someone else. But sometimes it's really not that simple. Sometimes it's noticing a person only shows up when it's convenient for them, but not when you need them. Feeling like an afterthought, realizing they make decisions for their future, but don't treat it as something you want to build together. Even amidst that decision, there was no plan to make it work. And maybe there was even fear that you were the only one that wanted it to. All you wanted them to do was put effort in, because no matter how long you are together, 4 years or 50, effort within a relationship is the bare minimum. So you break up. Things are good between you. He sends you a Valentine's gift, and you stupidly think maybe he actually wants to try, so things are great for a while. He comes into town but doesn't see you. You are disappointed and express that you didn't understand what was the point of them telling you that if they weren't going to actually make time for you. He says you're right and tells you next time he comes back in town, he will make time to visit you. Between those times, you have scheduled a day, gave ideas on what you could do, but tell him it has to be those specific days because your mom has surgery. The day before comes, you check if the plans are still happening. He says yes. The day comes and no texts or calls, but posted on his Snap story being at a concert or something. Days went by, still crickets, until the night before my mom's surgery. No apologies, just, hey, what's up? Comes to our hometown the day of my mom's surgery to drink with friends on the beach. Then, while my mom is still at the hospital, I am resting from the things I had to do, namely like getting the house together, doing whatever needs to be done, because since we're going to have people coming in and out of the house, there was a lot to do. He tells me that he's still in our city and was at a party. I didn't say anything, just reacted with 2 thumbs up on iMessage, and then he doesn't attempt to talk to me until maybe August 23rd. The conversation was brief. He wanted to call me, explain what happened. I told him no, I was volunteering that day, but even if I wasn't, truthfully, I would have said no. It wasn't just that one thing, although disrespecting someone's time that way is unforgivable in my book. It was everything from 2022, from the lack of dates, and then anytime I would try to advocate for myself in the relationship because I wanted it to work, it was always, he's going through something, or he's going through this and that, and that would be fine to mention if he didn't always say it when I brought up things to him. If he would have said those things when I would regularly ask him how he is or what he was up to, it was always like, good, at work, until I tried to bring something up that I wanted to solve with him. Anyways, before he decided to message me, around August 1st, I met up with some friends, and one of them was telling me about her new boyfriend. And since the ex I had didn't bother to contact me to apologize, in my head that was a response. So I downloaded Hinge. I tried it maybe up to August 9th because after that someone disgusted me by asking if I had a quote unquote dumpy, and that was an ick, and I unmatched and I didn't get back on the app until October 10th. Back to like the storyline. September 14th, I responded to his message from August 23rd. It was a lot, but essentially it ended with me saying next time he's back to pick up his stuff from my house, because at that point I just felt like if you already came to town 2 times already, did not see me, and even the second time you were supposed to see me and you lied about it and you didn't do it, I just felt like, what's the point of keeping your stuff anyways? But anyway, so he responds 2 days later saying he will, and if I want to talk or not, he understands, but then proceeds to say that he thinks he was falling out of love with me without noticing. Then after that conversation, we don't really talk again until October 3rd. Technically, we had a 3-line exchange September 18th to 19th, but October 1st, he says something randomly after not replying from the 19th, and a few things were exchanged, but honestly, I'm a blunt person, so I say, I don't know what to say right now. It went downhill from there because he said, I still did love you, I did, but now I see you as a friend because we've known each other for so long. And then I crashed out essentially, saying how I knew he was falling out of love, but wouldn't end things. And I told him, he confirmed what I feared, which was being temporary, and I was. And then he was like that in his mind I wasn't, but he didn't feel loved the same way. Got tired, and also slips in at the end that he's low-key talking to someone. So I said, okay, then talking to me is what you shouldn't be doing. And honestly, everything else, just too much. So since he blindsided me like that, I worked on moving on and did. The whole thing was upsetting and overwhelming to deal with, because when you are the one who made sure to check in and ask if there's anything I could do to be a better partner, and all they reply is, no, everything is good, and they feel like I'm doing enough just to turn around and say that they didn't feel loved, which is kind of a slap in the face. And it honestly just felt like another way of telling me I wasn't enough, even though I tried to understand him and tried to understand how he felt loved, but he never created that same space for me. Hence why I said it kind of felt like I kept advocating for myself. And while this experience of everything that happened was so exhausting, I took a lot of lessons out of that experience, namely the ones I listed before, which contributed to my growth and shifted how I view love and romantic connections. Though this time of my life became full in other ways from friends and family, so I wasn't so isolated, plus working with a therapist, I still have care for him despite everything that happened. I wish like nothing ill towards him. The only reason I shared this story and wanted to add it into this episode to explain the lessons better, honestly, I shared this as a cautionary tale that our desire to be validated will make us lose ourselves, and how having this expected timeline will keep you in places that just isn't right for you longer. And I had to grieve the idea of a future I imagined being gone, but I feel prepared to continue to date intentionally without making romantic partnership the end all be all of my worth. I know I have so much love to give, and one day I will have a partner who will speak the same language as I do. But until then, I will continue to show love to my friends and my family and to God and to everyone and thing that gives me meaning. So that's why I wanted to add that. So moving on to the last lessons. So lesson 17, someone else's life is not meant to be a reflection of how yours should go. Lesson number 18, time is something you make. We defy how it's used, how our values are infused, and what is important to you. Lesson number 19, it doesn't need to make sense to people outside of your experience. 20, you don't owe anyone an explanation. Convincing people to see your truth is a waste of energy. Lesson 21, find the joy in the peace. There is joy when, quote unquote, nothing happens because a moment is happening. Lesson 22, what you dream of is just the surface level of your capabilities. Lesson number 23, when you are meant to have big things happen to you, the lessons will hit harder and your time will take longer, but it's worth it. Lesson 24, extraordinary is extra for a reason. Be patient and persist. So obviously the last lessons combined, I want it to be a very positive message because sometimes I know I mentioned like the timeline and things not making sense to other people and letting go of validation from other people. I mentioned that in the entire story time, but I wanted to end this with a positive message that things might take longer for you, but that does not mean it's not happening. It doesn't mean that things are not worthy of pursuing. And even if things don't work out exactly how you want, that doesn't mean it can't lead to new pathways. For the card pull, I used the Wild Unknown Pocket Animal Spirit book by Kim Krans. So it says, Eagle, all pervading power, truth seeker, transforms karma. The noble eagle emanates the light of the sun. This great bird is both physically and spiritually strong and represents mastery over the elements of fire and air. When the eagle appears, you'll soon be thrown into the karmic fire for the sake of your transformation. The eagle pushes us to be our best and brightest selves and stops at nothing to see us shine. Grasp the sun in your talons and hold on for the ride. You are stronger than you think, eagle child. When in balance, bright, radiant challenges. When out of balance, controlling. To bring into balance, step into the unknown. And I think this is the perfect way to kind of wrap up the lessons episode because I felt like I went into the year with so much unknowns, and these are the lessons that came out of it for me. And sometimes when we are in a transformation process that we don't see really what's happening and we get so afraid of the unknown. But you see, like, I stepped into this year, at least me personally, and look how much I could have observed from it, learned from it. And a lot of things from my perspective were very unexpected. And I think this is very important to recognize, and I think that's why we got the card pull as the eagle. And moving on to what I'm grateful for this episode, I'm going to say to be recovered from being sick. So basically, November was a rough month. I think I got forced into rest because I wasn't doing enough of that. I got COVID for the second time. The first time I got it, it was like December 2021, and I went into 2022 so sick, which kind of reflected how bad I went into 2022. I just did not like that year. I felt like so much hard things started from that year, and I mean, hard lessons could have good come out of it, but yeah, so I'm grateful to be recovered because being sick is terrible. I had no appetite. I was just unable to do much. I was coughing to a point. I kept having nosebleeds. I never had nosebleeds in my life, and after being sick, I kept having nosebleeds. Honestly, I'm grateful for when I'm healthy. Like, being sick always makes you so grateful for the days because sometimes we take our health for granted, like when we're able to function. But once you're sick, I hate being sick. I hate being sick. I hate being sick. It is like the worst feeling ever. And I'm grateful that I'm recovered. And every single time, and I just want to remind you, if you're healthy right now, if you're not sick right now, appreciate it. Have gratitude for it, because that is the reason why I had to put these episodes together, because I was sick for like 2 weeks trying to do a podcast episode, knowing very well that I was still like in a brain fog. I knew it wouldn't come out as good as I would want to. And also knowing like speeding into work would not be a good idea. And I hope you like this episode, find this episode interesting. I have to get going. I was trying to record all episodes today, but that didn't work out because it took a long time for me to figure out the rest of the episodes. And on top of that, there was a dog that kept barking. So a lot of noise in the background. Anyways, have a good day, evening, or night. And don't forget to come back for part 2 and part 3. Don't forget to like, comment, share. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to this, from a podcast site, follow the podcast, comment on the podcast if you can. It would mean the world to me, and thank you so much. And that is all. Okay, bye.